Artificial intelligence is remaking marketing as we speak, and if you're a marketer, you can either get up to speed or get left behind. The choice is yours, and really, it's a no-brainer. Join Geoff Livingston and Greg Verdino as they explore the latest AI news, trends, tools, and ideas that are creating the future of marketing today. This is No Brainer, an AI podcast for marketers. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, yes, I am an AI. Take it away, Geoff and Greg.
Hey, this is Greg Verdino, and you are tuned into No Brainer. I'm here with Geoff Livingston. What's going on, Geoff?
Hey!
It is September already. I can't even believe it. It's summer.
It's cool.
Is
I'm glad it's over.
Cool. Was today first day of school where you are?
2 weeks ago, but I feel like now there's no more vacation. I'm busy. Let's meet in 2 weeks kind of stuff. It's like go or don't go.
Yeah, that's true. Right. It's business again. It's after Labor Day. No more white and no more excuses. We started school here today. Little guy's
awesome.
first day of third grade. So
third grade.
Get him out of the house. No more Minecraft, and we can get focused back on business. So shall we get into it, my friend?
Yeah, speaking of excuses, we have 10 excuses that enterprises use to avoid implementing AI today, right?
Well, I don't know if they're excuses. Some of them certainly are, but they're all certainly barriers. And that's really what we're going to dive in today are 10 common barriers to AI marketing success. And we're going to certainly run them down. We're going to talk a little bit about why they happen, why they are such big problems for a lot of organizations. And we're going to share some thoughts that we have about what you can do to overcome these obstacles so that you can find success in your AI initiatives. So I think it's going to be a really good one. I think it's going to be an interesting one. I think it's going to be a lot of fun today, Geoff.
Yeah, and I think it's timely, right? Like you're coming up on 2024. I think a lot of businesses have experimented with AI, right? But now they're getting down to brass tacks, or they're thinking about it. And I've seen, at least with several businesses, them fall flat on their face because of some of these. And as we move off the hype cycle and into the trough of disillusionment, if Gartner is accurate that we're at the peak of the hype cycle, I kind of feel like we're starting to get there. Businesses are going to really face these failures, right? And they're going to see that they're not getting AI the way that they thought they would. And there are internal reasons for that beyond just, hey, this tech may not work or doesn't work. There's actual cultural issues.
Right. Yeah, and I think the important thing is it's not just that they're not getting it, but they're not getting the results that they might have expected to see from this technology. So hopefully this will be a really helpful episode for our listeners and our viewers on YouTube. And speaking of listening and viewing, before we dive into the heart of the show, if you are listening on any of your favorite podcast services, of course, please be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and all of that good stuff. And again, if you are on YouTube having a look at our lovely faces, please be sure to smash the like button for this episode, but also subscribe to the channel. If you've got friends who are also marketers who might be interested in AI, of course, we would love it if you recommended the show to them and ask them to check us out. I don't know why my mouth stopped working there for a couple of minutes, which means that it's time for me to toss it to you, Geoff. Why don't we kick it off with the first of the 10 obstacles that we see organizations facing with Gen AI?
You can always tell two bloggers together when they come up with something like the 10 obstacles of enterprise AI. So we'll make a little fun of ourselves just to start, and you can take it for what it's worth. But these are the things that we're observing in the marketplace. And I think the first is the classic one, right? Which is shiny object lands. And then people are like, ooh, we got to use it, right? And then they just go run off and use it with no thought at all. I think a great example of that is, let's put our code in ChatGPT and see what happens, which is, it's great if you're an individual programmer futzing around on your own stuff, but probably not good if you're, JP Morgan or Chase or, Under Armour or anybody that's got a proper business of any sort. You don't want to be putting your code into ChatGPT. And I think that what we've seen is a lot of people getting trapped in tactics, right? Oh, I need to use Jasper to write. Oh, I need to use Stable Diffusion for my graphic design. Oh, I need to use this AI web designer. And they don't really think about what they're doing or why they're doing it. It's just, I heard that's really good. It'll save me a ton of time. And I think right away when we start doing things beyond just like, oh, checking things out, seeing what this is all about, getting that information, it's kind of that light play experimentation that everybody does when they first get into these generative tools. When you start using them in your business without actually thinking about intent and outcome and measuring it, then you're in a position of weakness right out of the gate. And that sets you up for somebody saying, I don't really see any value in that at all.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think that what you're really pointing at is, as you use the phrase "trapped in tactics," right? And that's the sign, right? And I think the challenge is that it's everything you're describing is perfectly fine early on in a development cycle, right? You need to experiment. You need to play. You need to put your fingers on the keyboard. You need to really gain that kind of firsthand understanding of what is this thing all about? How would I use it? Is it as good as people say they are? No. And all of that. But I think where organizations get into trouble is when they don't step it up to strategy, right? That's really the problem. And I think as a shorthand, we might say AI strategy or generative AI strategy, but what we really mean is how do you tie these tools or the technology, more than the tools, into your core marketing strategy or your core business strategy? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? It's not having, just like it wasn't about having a social media strategy per se, or a Facebook strategy or a Threads strategy, God forbid. It's about how do you take this technology and use it to accelerate your strategic results, right?
100%. I mean, if you think about it, if AI is your strategy, you don't have a marketing program. You don't have a sales program. You have, let me throw shit up against the wall and see what sticks. That's your strategy. Throwing the spaghetti up there, see what happens. And that's a disaster waiting to happen. And we've seen it over and over again. We saw it during the social media era. It's the classic shiny object syndrome in my mind. And it leads very well into point 2, which I think you're going to take. But I think when you have that happening and that's occurring and the CEO says to you or the CMO, are we doing AI? And you're like, yes, we're doing ChatGPT, or we're doing Jasper, we're doing copy, we're doing Midjourney. We got it. We've got the Adobe. We're good. We got it. That's a clear sign of a lack of, my man.
I guess that brings us to obstacle number 2, which is sort of a lack of vision or commitment or support from organizational leadership. Obviously, this is not consistent everywhere you look. There are certainly plenty of organizations where senior leadership, the C-suite, the chief marketing officer, whomever, does have a vision. They are committed to embracing this technology and experimenting and ultimately becoming more strategic with what this technology can do for you. But certainly in other organizations, there appears to be a clear lack of this sort of senior leadership vision and commitment. And sometimes this comes to light in organizations, for example, where they might even prohibit the use of tools like ChatGPT. And they're happening, right? You know that these tools are being used by the worker bees in the organization, and leadership is just turning a blind eye, or even worse, their edict to not use the tools, that edict is being obeyed by the organization, in which case they're just falling further and further behind. But I think what's important is that leaders need to have a vision for the integration of artificial intelligence into their marketing programs, into their marketing organizations, and into their marketing workflows. And they need to convey that vision and demonstrate their commitment to the workforce so that everybody understands this is why we're doing it. Here's what we're in it for. And here's what it means for me as an individual contributor. Here's what it means for me as a manager. Here's what it means for our consumers, our customers, our partners, my peers across the organization, and why it is important as a component of my strategy.
Right. And to your point, it's not that banning ChatGPT is a bad idea, because I would argue if you have data issues, it's probably a good idea. But what's a bad idea is getting rid of that capability, right?
Right.
Not finding a way to bring that capability within your firewalls or having a strategy for it.
Right.
Just
Exactly.
having a draconian barbarian shutdown, like, that's it. We're not doing it.
Right. And I use ChatGPT as the example because we've heard about those kinds of bans, but there's certainly, to your point, it's not ChatGPT specifically, it's generative AI as a capability.
Right. Yeah, because you could, okay. So we won't go there. So I think like what I see, which is also dangerous with the lack of leadership, is giving people charges to do this and then leaving the building. You know what I mean? Like,
right, 100%.
Walking into your office, I saw an article. I see ChatGPT is not secure. We need to do a private instance, Greg. Make it happen. And then leave, right?
Right.
And then what happens if Greg, which I know you're not, but Greg says, you know what? I don't really like ChatGPT and I think it could take my job. I'm out. I'm not doing this. I'm going to delay this as long as I can. I'm going to quiet quit on this project, And look, this is reality. You think people won't do that? There are people doing it that are listening to this podcast, probably. I mean, I've seen it over and over again over the past like 6-9 months where people have just done everything they can to find an excuse not to do this. And part of it's fear, part of it's subconscious, and part of it's existential. I don't want to be replaced by it. Part of it's like, I don't want another project. I'm overworked. I don't need more work, even though this might reduce my work. It's just kind of like this weird catch-22. But when lack of leadership includes not building the project out fully and building in those metrics and building the AI into the larger strategy. How can this help us achieve our mission? What is our mission? And where can these tools help support us get there? And how can we measure that? And maybe we can take a whole bunch of projects and see which ones might be the best ones to invest in based on potential for ROI.
Sure.
That's leadership, right? That's strategy. That's thinking through something. And by the way, leadership doesn't necessarily have to start up here.
Absolutely.
It can come from down and up and out. But, when there's no leadership or vision and there's no commitment or support from the organization to back it and make it happen as part of their DNA, part of their recipe for dominating a market, which is what all marketers want to do, it's problematic. It's problematic.
Yeah. Now, I think you've, in a way, touched on what would be obstacle or barrier number 3, because I think it literally goes hand in hand with lack of leadership. So why don't we jump onto that one? Which
we may have even written a story arc with this thing. I don't know.
The accidental story arc.
Accidental story arcs, right? So I think employee resistance is huge. We've talked about it several times. I just saw a news story. I was doom scrolling AI stories before I came here. That's what I call it now. Like half the stories are about like the end of the world and the other half are about Sam Altman getting a golden visa to Indonesia. Whatever. Sam Altman is the foil of this show. I really believe that. So all jokes aside, I mean, employees have a lot to worry about with AI. We know this. A lot of the worry is actually self-fulfilling in the sense that if you don't adapt it, you're actually putting yourself in danger of being replaced by it because you won't know how to use the power tools. I love that carpenter analogy, which we've used. I love the accountant's analogy. But all those professions already have tools that help them automate tasks, whether that's screwdrivers or Excel sheets with macros, right? I mean, The reality is this is what we're walking into now. And there are just people that don't want to see it happen. And I've seen people blow up deals. I've literally heard in a meeting when an executive took an AI solution to people, we don't need that. We already do that ourselves. Basically, we don't want a bot to do that.
Yeah, right.
That's problematic, right? I mean, this is
absolutely.
something that strikes happen over. I mean, it's massive. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think there's almost a split between organizations. There are some organizations where there is a strong grassroots movement inside the organization that can create its own problems. And I think we actually have another obstacle that's related to that to an extent, where people inside the organization are doing these sort of shadow AI little implementations or projects, or bringing a tool from home, so to speak. They're using the free chat GPT or their personal subscription to Poe or whatever it is, because these tools are so cheap. And the leader in the organization doesn't have the vision, doesn't have their arms wrapped around it, aren't really thinking about how do all of these little things come together to create something big and great. And then you've got the flip side, which is the leader has a vision. They know what they want to achieve, or at least have an idea of what they want to achieve if they don't know per se, because all of this is still so new to so many organizations. But when it hits the sort of the first line of defense, middle management or whatever, it all kind of falls apart the way you're describing, where a leader says, we're going to do this, and a middle manager is like, well, that's kind of my job. And what's, I think, interesting is so much of this is driven by the hype machine, right? Because so much of the hype has been around, will your job be replaced? Will you be replaced by a machine? How many people can we kind of filter out of the organizations as we become smarter and smarter about implementing generative AI inside the organization? And who's that that kind of messaging coming from the technology companies and the media, quite frankly? Who is that messaging geared towards? The leader, who is, to whom a cost savings message will really resonate, not the worker who feels like they're going to be disrupted. So it creates all of this fear, this uncertainty, the doubt, confusion. Sure. And in absence of a strong leader communicating clearly, why are we on this journey? Where is the journey going to take us? How is this going to affect you, good, bad, and otherwise? And how are we going to have your back and help you come along and upskill and reskill? Without that strong communication and commitment from the leadership of an organization, it just creates a vacuum for people who have to execute this stuff at the line level.
Right. And there are a couple more thoughts on this. Why are people afraid? And I don't think it's AI. Actually, I actually think it's because they know the way American capitalism works.
Absolutely. It's not the technology, it's the people,
it's the management
making decisions about what to do with the technology.
And you know what, executives? This is your payback. This is your just deserves for treating people like crap. People are afraid of you, and you have this culture now where people are constantly just fighting to keep their jobs. And that is now a kind of like a painful moment where you see this adoption cycle stop. The other thing that occurs to me is change management really needs to come in here. And what I mean by that is, instead of like handing this down to Greg, the employee, Greg, make AI happen. Greg, your annual review is going to be contingent on your success building this AI. Here's some money. Here's some goals. Here's my support. I need you to be the internal advocate for this. Are you willing to do it? And then you have to have that internal evangelist that drives the project. You have to have somebody own it that's not an executive, that works for the executive, but is basically the lieutenant that's put in charge of it. And it could be somebody that's junior, that's really given their first thing. We saw this all the time with social media and the social media manager. You need an AI manager. You need somebody that's going to drive the change throughout the organization, bring success, show early victories, demonstrate to people that it's actually easy to use. It's going to make their life easier. It's going to make things better. They're going to have more fun at work, doing more creative projects. This is the kind of, obvious move that a lot of businesses are missing. And the other one is, if you're in a larger enterprise, obviously doing the full change management program to actually get people into using AI tools as a productivity mechanism, rather than just saying it's on, just like Zoom, make it happen.
Absolutely. And I think in a way that almost leads us to our number 4. Again, it's that damn story arc, Geoff. I don't know what's going on here. But the fourth barrier that we came up with and that we're seeing in organizations is a confusion about how to actually use this stuff. And we don't necessarily mean a confusion about, how do you use ChatGPT? What's a prompt, right? That's a whole separate animal. But it's really more this sense that generative AI hit the market. It scaled very quickly. It came into the mainstream consciousness for businesses, at least. And it became a mandatory must-do for so many marketers. But at the same time, the rhetoric around it has been so over the top that you have this sense that this is a technology that can do virtually anything really, really well. And the truth of the matter is that that's not the case. And then that's kind of almost counterbalanced by this sort of very narrow view you have in some cases of, oh, it's just a writing assistant, or it's just something that helps me make pretty pictures or whatever. So there's like this weird sense of it does everything, yet it only does this one thing. And there's like just a lot of confusion about how do I actually find the best possible applications for this technology to support the kind of work I do. And it I think is in many ways almost grinding some people a little bit to a halt. Either they get this expectation of it could do these things really, really well, and then when they try it, it doesn't actually work the way it was promised to. And then you have this other sense of I just tried this one thing and it worked for me, or it didn't work for me. I'm not going to try the 30 other things. So a lot of that is driven by the vendors. Especially, I think it's like the model vendors, companies like OpenAI, are sort of presenting a panacea. This is good for whatever ails you, right? And that's really in a lot of ways snake oil. And then the application vendors obviously are very self-serving, very self-centered. And if you make a writing assistant, your entire Gen AI playbook is about nothing but writing assistants, right? So if somebody is getting their education through you in that scenario, they're getting a very, very, not just partial, but also very narrow view. So it's like that's like kind of like this like panacea versus point solution dichotomy that is, I think, creating a lot of confusion in the marketplace.
Yeah, I have a bone to pick with OpenAI on this one in particular, and I really see them as like the big problem maker here, where they promise everything and then they go to Congress and say, well, this could be a catastrophic existential technology that kills us all, and they've played the hype cycle to the point of brilliance, where they have $1 billion in revenue from it. But at the same time, they've caused so much market confusion. Even their enterprise ChatGPT announcement last week was just horseshit. I'm sorry. It was just anybody that understood what's been happening in the market the last 4 months kind of laughed at it and said, so what? You're late. You're really late. In fact, you're competing against your own customers now. Does that make a lot of sense? Doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's like Microsoft with the Surface versus everybody else. It's like, do you really want to be competing against Dell and HP? I kind of feel like Microsoft just does that to kind of, I don't know why they do it. I just don't get it.
And it's a good point, when you talk about that announcement, and it's every announcement that I feel like OpenAI makes for the most part, is they announce something and then they only release it in a limited fashion to a small subset of their users, and the rest of the world is just kind of left wondering, is this real? Is this not real? Right? So, if you wanted to sign up for ChatGPT Enterprise, you put your name on a list and you wait for a sales rep to call you. Right. So imagine you're, an AI manager. Let's pretend an AI manager exists in marketing organization X, and you're digital director, your CMO says, hey, find out about this. This sounds right for us. Go check it out. All you can do is put your name on a list and hope you get a call back, right? The same thing is true with, we talked about plugins last week, and that's still
Right.
kind of gated, right?
Yeah, you have a wait list.
Right, there's a
Just
wait
like,
list.
but that was like the Apple Store too, right? With the apps.
But it's but it's so it's almost like they feel like they need to demonstrate momentum by constantly announcing new features and functionality, and then they make it available to 7 people.
They are the press release machine, and there comes a point where that tail wagging the dog comes back and gets bit by the dog, and it's coming. It's coming around for them at some point. But this is just a larger problem with the vendors. I feel like they have a lot of technology that's really interesting that doesn't have a clear use built into it. Like, it's not product engineered. It's not product marketed well. Like, product marketing would have an addressable market that the product's developed for.
Right.
It wouldn't just happen in a vacuum where you're coming out with use cases and trying to see if people will bite on those.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, there's some of that positioning that happens once you get a product into market. But I feel like that's happening at every one of these little unicorn startups that come out with their new AI product. Like, I don't know how many video editors I've heard from over the past 3-4 weeks.
Right.
Like, hey, we'd love to brief you. We'd love to show you what we're doing. And it's the same thing with GPT private engines now. Like, everybody and their mother is doing private engines. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
But you know what? They come to me with their use case, and I'm like, well, that's not what I need it for.
Right.
And the confusion on the enterprise side is by reading those instead of dictating to vendors what they want. And there's a third point, maybe a fourth, I don't know. There's so many points of confusion. I'm so confused. But the other point of confusion that I think a lot of businesses have, and I've seen this one, is they think it should cost $50 a month or $100 a month. And then they bring their strategy and their use case to the table, and it's like, no, that's $80,000 because that's pretty custom ML. You may have some computer vision in there, some generative AI, all that fun stuff. And the next thing you know, with this complex AI model, you're forking out some money, and then you have to find the resources to do it.
Yeah,
That's not good. I mean,
Nope.
This should not cost that. You're trying to rip me off. No, actually, I'm not ripping you off. There is no point solution. There is no unicorn solution that's going to do that. Go ahead. Have fun. Try it.
Right.
Go ahead and find it.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of reel back a little bit to what you were talking about in terms of not kind of clearly defining what the market need is, because there's something, it's, sort of like you with the video editing solutions. There's 4,000 of them, and they all do something slightly different, but mostly the same. And they're not actually articulating how they're different, why they're different. They don't understand how you use a video editing tool or whatever. And I see the exact same thing with the writing tools. And I've seen so many of the writing assistants go to market with a message, something to the effect of, kind of banish the blank page or something like that. Like, you don't need to start from a blank page anymore. Every writer I know loves the blank page. That's not the problem that they're having, right?
No, it's refinement.
It's not the blank page. Like, that's how, like, a skilled writer starts, like, gets their ideas onto the table. It's the stuff that happens after that, right?
Yeah.
It's how do I take all the stuff I parsed onto the blank page and structure it? How do I decide what stays in and what comes out? How do I edit? How do I now fill in some of the blanks? How do I do my research? How do I, fix my grammar or whatever it is? But, like, to a writer, the blank page is like a gift in a lot of cases. So when you see some of these tools that are like, banish the blank page, and it's like, but I don't want to banish the blank page. It's part of what makes my job as a writer fulfilling. It's part of the way I express my creativity. It's not an obstacle. It's not a problem. It's not a hurdle I'm trying to overcome. It's very, so that's a perfect example of these companies not doing proper sort of product market fit and not really understanding what the actual pain points are.
Well, and also, like, and this gets back to point 3 with employee hesitance and resistance. It's also on the vendors for not providing customer success solutions and training. It's like, come on, that's change management from the product side. Like, you have this great product. Your WYSIWYG's nice, but I have no freaking clue what this thing can do. You say it can do this. Show me how
Right.
it can do it and
Yeah.
how I can work with it as a co-pilot rather than just like, here, play with our tool.
Yeah. That's another problem too, is I've definitely seen that where I've had a demo call with a platform that essentially is like, here are the 87 things that we offer. And it's like, okay, but show me how it works. Well, you can play with it. We have a 1-week free trial. It's like, okay, but show me how it works. I'm not going to play with everybody's platform. I would spend my entire day doing that, right? I need you to show me what it does, show me how it works, explain to me how it's different. Well, it's not. It's kind of the same. It's like, well, then why am I looking at this?
Right.
It's like, like, come on. It's like, it's almost like, they don't have that kind of product marketing and customer marketing maturity that
They
you would
don't.
expect from any other SaaS company, which is effectively
That's because
the
they
way
need
they're
old bald
positioning the
hats like
market.
us, bro.
All
Oh my
right, shall
God.
we move on?
It's the AI kvetch session. AI kvetch number 5. Get off my lawn. All jokes aside, like this one I've seen a bunch too, right? This is the data thing. And I've seen this small and large where we want to do something. We're going to ingest data. We have to have a bunch of our images created. We want to take in our style guide. We want an AI writer to write like us. So we need to train it on our own documents. And people don't have clean data. And then they realize how much it's going to cost to clean data. And worse, how much it's going to cost or the amount of change it's going to take to continue to maintain clean data after that kind of moment of reckoning, if you would. And it actually can really blow up AI really quickly because it's the old garbage in, garbage out thing. If you can't feed your own implementation with quality information, it's not going to perform well. And so you need the data to work well, but nobody thinks about that until they get through the leadership thing. They decide to go, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, bam, they hit the floor right out of the gate, face first, right? Or when they look at the estimates of how much it's going to cost to clean the data, they're like, well, who's going to do that? We can't afford that, and we're not going to do that. Well, then you're not going to do AI,
Yeah. It's, I kind of think of it in a lot of ways as the, what's that phrase? The sins of the father are visited upon the son, right? That organizations for decades and decades and decades didn't take data governance seriously. So they either have incomplete data or they have inaccurate data or it's siloed away, right? The social media team has some stuff and the ad campaign guys have something else and customer service has another chunk of data and accounting has a fourth set of data about, billing and payments and all of that kind of stuff, and it's all spread across the organization and nobody's actually made the effort to bring it all together into a unified single customer view, right? They talked about it maybe because that's been a topic for, I feel like, decades maybe. But so many organizations, and to your point, large and small, it's not just the little guys, the big guys have the same problem. They never brought it together into a single customer view. They don't have a single database. Things are formatted differently.
They may not even use their Google Analytics.
Absolutely. I was talking to one organization last week who they've invested in, and this is a problem that I've kind of seen some stuff about, of companies investing in marketing, martech or sales tech, and not actually using it. This is a fairly large organization. I won't say who invested a substantial amount of money, as you do, in Salesforce.
Yes.
And the sales team isn't even using it. They continue to track their leads manually in spreadsheets and all of that. And the head of sales has been struggling to enforce this with his team, but there's only so much that he feels he can do before it becomes disruptive to the way his team sells and whatever. But you have scenarios like that, right, where you actually have a tool that you could use to bring your customer data together, and it's not being used consistently by the organization. You mentioned style guide and images and content not being stored in digital formats, or ad campaigns that are still on like paste up board from 1972 that are stuck in an archive someplace. All of this all of a sudden becomes gold, right? You need to be able to leverage all of this data and turn it into something that is machine readable, that can be interpreted, that can be ingested, that can be turned into the raw material for whatever your AI system is going to output. Whether it's predictive analytics or it's generative AI, you need this data to make it proprietary and fresh and custom to your organization. And I think a lot of organizations today are having that holy crap moment when they're like, oh, cool, we're all in on Gen AI. And they go, but wait a second. We don't actually have the data to train the systems to achieve the things we want to achieve. And that's a huge problem.
It's a good segue to the next one, because either cleaning the data or finding the data is expensive, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's your point, right?
And that's our sort of sixth obstacle or barrier, is the high cost of these solutions that organizations, I think, because they were kind of a little bit bamboozled by the it's free, right? The introduction of free ChatGPT, and on at face value, a lot of the applications sound really cheap: $20, $30, $50, $90, until you multiply that across your organization, and the per API call sounds cheap. When you start to realize just how many calls your system is making, and then you think about the costs of training and retraining a model or an algorithm and all of this stuff, it starts to add up very quickly into a very expensive proposition for any organization that's doing this stuff seriously. And I had seen, I don't know whose research it was, if it was Gartner or Forrester, and I'm not even sure I could dig it up in time to put it into the show notes, but they actually had or made a claim. I don't know if it was research based or was it just an analyst making a prediction that, within the next handful of years, a lot of organizations may actually abandon their generative AI programs when they realize just how expensive they are and aren't able to track any kind of material improvements back to them. That's a real problem, is these organizations dig in and they do all this work, and then they discover that, wow, this is just way too expensive. And they haven't done the good work that should have happened back at barrier number 2, right? Which is,
what's your strategy?
Real objective-driven strategy, right? So they don't know what they want to achieve. They don't know what success looks like. They don't know what the value of that success is to the organization or its stakeholders. And they're sitting there with a big fat bill, and it becomes a way to cut cost eventually at some point.
And it's a reasonable fear. I mean, if you look at the way technology implementations have gone historically, with the waterfall method of adopting technology and building your own projects and the failures, of course you don't want to do it inside. Of course you want on a cloud provider, solution space, some sort of an enterprise platform, but these products aren't built for enterprises yet. Or if they are, they're just so early. It's like Buffer or Hootsuite, not even 1.0, it's like 0.1. They haven't really engineered it for marketing. The one I think nobody really likes, Jasper, on this hosting stand here. The one that really strikes me that way is Jasper. Man, Jasper is not that good at least for me. It's not that good. I don't really like using it, and I don't really understand what it's there for now. They tell me like you had started. You never have to have a blank page. You can build any kind of content you want. Now we can do your entire marketing campaign for you. I put one thing in there. I'm like, no, you can't. And I know how to prompt. So please don't tell me it's my prompting. I'm pretty sure it's you. And
Right.
and I've used other AI tools that and they're a little bit better than this. That's a classic example of this is not ready for prime time yet. In my mind, it's
Right.
not ready for a professional marketing department. It might be really good for a startup.
Right.
It might be really good for mom and pop.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, once you get into a sort of an organization with a substantial marketing capability, that even raises questions. And we're getting a little bit off the topic here of cost, but what is a campaign? Because if I'm a major brand, I'm not looking for a cookie cutter, by the numbers, fill in the blanks, color by number campaign structure that somebody at Jasper decided is the right way to run a digital campaign, right? I'm going to want to do things that are way outside that box, in which case a tool like that starts to fall apart. And then you get to the stuff that is more enterprise class, running stuff in like Azure or Amazon Bedrock or whatever, and you're talking hefty price tag.
Right.
And even some of the things that you might not consider, like the governance platforms, are quite expensive. You can spend easily 6 figures just on governance tools.
And if you're a large enterprise, that makes sense. And the thing is that you really have this kind of huge gap in the market where you have the point solutions and you have the enterprise solutions. And the enterprise solutions have been created and engineered by large professional services companies, usually, or the sales forces of the world for enterprises that are grossing hundreds of millions, billions, tens of billions of dollars. Right? These are the people that can afford that kind of solution. Now, the mid market's coming in, and everybody's kind of like, this doesn't work for me. This point solution, I need this. But now you're telling me it's going to cost $300,000 to do that? That's very problematic for a lot of companies that are making the gross, let's say, 8 figures. And 8 figures could be anywhere between 10 and 99 million. But I guarantee you just throw an $80,000 project at any business in that range, and they're going to object. That's a lot of cash. It's definitely going to go through procurement at a very, very on the easiest level, right?
Yeah.
If you're on that larger side.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll say don't get us wrong, because I think we're on the same page. For anybody listening, we are not saying that enterprise caliber solutions are not worth it, right? There's a reason why enterprise caliber solutions cost enterprise caliber money. That's not the problem per se. It's investing in these things without having a clear, sort of open-eyed assessment of what it costs to actually deploy and maintain a proper enterprise level AI solution. And then you're pointing to, I think, another interesting sort of angle on all of this, which is that the market so far is ignoring the vast space in between consumer and enterprise.
Right.
These larger organizations that are not quite large enough to afford 7-8 figure solutions, but can't subsist on $20 SaaS subscriptions,
right?
That don't have the kinds of capabilities and features and functionality that they would require of any other technology investment they make.
And that's because of the way the market dynamics work financially. I mean, venture will back point solutions because they want to see the most amount of subscribers possible.
Yeah.
And Wall Street rewards big revenue dollars. So if you're Accenture, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to work with somebody that's going to pay you $700,000, $7 million, or $70,000.
Yeah.
And it's definitely going to be that larger size. And, they won't even look at smaller, medium enterprises to some extent.
Right. And what's interesting, too, is I'm seeing some of this as well, is that in a large sort of multinational conglomerate, the sort of primo brands, the A-list brands inside that organization have Accenture money. And they can afford to implement 7, 8, 9 figure solutions sometimes. But the secondary brands don't have access to Accenture and don't have the budget to kind of piggyback onto those solutions. And there's of course a lot of territorialism and silos and things like that in these organizations. So you end up with these, even in a large company, a secondary or tertiary brand having a problem getting the right level of support and having access to the right caliber of tools,
Right.
and needing something in the middle and getting a little bit stuck.
Perfect segue, my man, which is that there are not the right vendors and tech partners out there. I believe there are not the right vendors and tech partners, or it's an emerging field that is still in its very early stages, that is not available to serve that marketplace. Basically, that middle market that can, that can buy a HubSpot but doesn't want to buy that massive Salesforce implementation, right? And even HubSpot can be a very large company solution. So, I mean, the reality is that, with the way that, I know this is probably coming on later on, but the way the markets work, funding is not there to build these types of solutions right now for small and medium enterprises, or people aren't thinking about it. And that means that everybody that builds a product based off of our podcast today owes us money. And on top of that, though, I mean, there aren't really kind of like those, what we would call those niche consulting groups. Like there are a whole bunch of people around DC that have these small boutique agencies. I mean, I can count probably on both hands and then onto my toes. People that have like marketing automation companies or search marketing companies. There aren't those like boutique 20, 25 types of person, 20, 25 person types of organizations that could fulfill that gap, that would really work well with like a $50 million company looking to do some AI, right? Because to them, a big project's a couple $100,000, right?
Right.
To that boutique, that's like a huge client. And so like It's a win-win. That market's not there yet. I kind of see it starting to bubble. And I imagine that probably by the end of next year, we'll start seeing more of it as demand increases. But it's not there right now. And so when you're in that small, medium enterprise, you're kind of like throwing things out there to see who can kind of fix this. And you're just getting more and more frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, absolutely, there's that. And I think, as I think about this broader issue of kind of like what's available and what's not available, it's also a very complex and confusing space if you're a buyer of these solutions, right?
Yeah.
There's 30 tools that all look and sound kind of the same, and you don't know what the differences are. You don't know what's right for you. You may not even know, because it's all new to you as a buyer, right? 8 months ago, 9 months ago, Gen AI was not didn't have a line item in the budget, right? You don't know what questions to ask. You don't know how to evaluate partners. You don't know the differences between the models they use. You don't know how to make sense of the fact that there's 300 companies all claiming to do the same thing, and you don't know why they're all running after this space, and it doesn't make any sense. And I think there's a lot of that too, right? Where you're hearing that, you mentioned HubSpot, we mentioned Salesforce, right? You're hearing that they're integrating generative AI tools or features into their platforms, but then there's standalone tools that do the same things. And how do you make the decisions between those two, let alone build versus buy or whatever, right? So there's all this craziness, I think, around how do I pick the right tools, whether I'm a small business, a mid-sized business, or a large enterprise. How do I know what's right for me, right?
Yeah. No, I think you're right on that. And I also think that, boy, this is just going to be kind of brutal, but I think that the pundit market doesn't do any favors here, right? Nobody's really taking honest assessments of products. I mean, even what we said about Jasper on this podcast is probably, like, woo, that was heavy hitting. Well, really, is it? I mean, it's not if you're a practitioner. It's just a one user's assessment, just one guy, right? But nobody's talking like that. Everybody's just regurgitating press releases, throwing out the hype engine, maybe throwing out conjecture. Will this work? Who knows? We'll all see. I mean, like, that's not helpful, I mean, what does that do for me as a user? What are the value points? How does it work? Does it work well? Does it integrate into my current marketing tech stack? How does it work? Or do I just have to do it myself with an API? Is that going to require a lot of development time? I mean, like, these are questions that any good reporter would have asked 20 years ago, or any good pundit would ask if they're actually reviewing these technologies sincerely.
That's a good point. I mean, obviously, the media has, for probably 20 years now, right, has taken sort of this uncritical stance on the entire sort of Silicon Valley scene, right? Anytime there is a hype bubble, they jump right onto the hype and they feed it because people are looking to kind of get that sort of that high on the hype. And there is not and that extends to the technologies themselves. It extends to the movement, right? Metaverse versus AI versus crypto versus NFTs versus whatever. But it also extends to the people, right? It's like, glowing stories about SBF or SFB. What the hell? I never get his name right. Sam Bankman-Fried. Or Sam Friedman Bank, I don't know, but like it was like glowing stories about this sort of young genius with the crazy hair up until he turned into a shit show,
right?
And then he's out of the press really quick, right? And like that same, it's like we have these like boy genius kind of
really
tech
simplified character types almost, right?
Right?
Like
hero,
villain.
Yeah, so like you have no like critical media who are looking at these tools the way, like, remember the olden days when like they like PC Magazine used to like do a shootout between a Dell whatever and an HP other thing,
and ZDNet would actually write articles
point for point and do like this critical review. You don't get that anymore. But I think your other point is more important, and maybe this is another business idea we're giving away for free, but the analysts, and I don't know that there are any analysts today that I would really turn to and trust, who are focused specifically on this space, that really have the ability to go deep and be honest and really kind of do what a Gartner does with their 4 quadrants, and really put these AI solutions into those quadrants and say, look, here are the leaders, here are the rising stars, here are the ones who are lagging, here are the ones who are just terrible,
and that's because they have the same business model as the large enterprise AI players, right? Where they're going after these large companies that can afford that $100,000, $200,000 Gartner project, hopefully on top of their subscription, right?
Yeah. So there's, maybe there's room for an an analyst firm like that, but certainly there's a need for an analyst firm.
No
like
kidding.
That.
Greg, what are we doing?
Because we need as marketers, we need the ability to see through the hype and to separate the wheat from the chaff.
No-brainer reviews.
You should add a review to every show, because the shows don't run long enough as it is.
Ooh, Jasper, our first victim. Okay.
So I guess that in a way brings us to number 8, which is sort of a lack of governance and workflows. And I think there's sort of a couple of things at play here. We talked a little bit about this earlier, sort of in terms of a big picture, where like a lot of marketing leaders aren't yet thinking about, how do I wrap my arms around all of this? How do I maintain control? I know people in my organization are exploring or experimenting, and there might even be a couple of use cases here or there that are bubbling up and are seeing some success. But I don't really know how, when, where, and how these systems are being used across my entire marketing organization. I don't really know what the implications of that are. I don't really have a good way to to understand and even potentially report up into my leadership team what are the benefits and what are the risks of these tools, because there could be organizational risks, there could be regulatory challenges, there could be reputational risks, we could be using our consumer data in the wrong way, right? You've got to really wrap your arms around that.
Right.
And I'm not talking about sort of the principled ethical stance. There's nothing wrong with that, but this is just the practical responsible AI stance and governance to really know what's happening and why it's happening and how it's happening so that you don't put your organization at risk. I think that's one definite challenge.
Well, it's kind of like the messy house thing, and I'm not the cleanest guy, so I'm just going to own that. But and I'm not saying anything about anybody, but the reality is if your own business isn't really clean with the way it does business, you're going to have problems that are self-created. And what governance and workflows really get at is repeatability and ease of adoption, and also avoidance and risk mitigation, to your point, particularly when it comes to crisis communications and also having data cybersecurity issues. I mean, this is massive stuff, right? Big red flags that stop adoption. And when you take an AI project to somebody, usually they get to this point in it and they kind of want to I don't want to pay for that. Well, okay, then don't pay for it and have the problem later. Because what you're telling me is you're the guy that doesn't clean your gutters. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's even, I think, a little bit easier, for some a lot of organizations where they have that, well, I don't want to go that far and do big governance. At a minimum is end user governance. That's like guidelines and standards and best practices.
You can't be mad at employees for putting code in ChatGPT if you don't tell them they can't do that. And
exactly. And there's still many organizations that haven't taken even that simple step. And I think in a lot of ways, especially for marketing organizations, end user governance, those guidelines, those standards are the first end, it's like the last line of defense and the first line of defense in some ways, right? Because if you're using, whether it's a HubSpot or a Salesforce or a Jasper or a Writer or, whatever the tool happens to be, you don't really control the model. You don't know what's happening in the black box of the algorithm. You didn't build the software. You don't know for sure where it's hosted. Is it really secure? Is the data being used? Is the data not being used? Is it, all that kind of stuff, right? You really can't control for a lot of that. You can do a lot of diligence, but you're only going to know what you can know, and you don't control it at all. But what you do control is whether Geoff puts proprietary information into the tool. What you do know is whether Geoff publishes an article without proofreading it and fact-checking and citing sources.
Or does it tag the article appropriately so we can put it into the engine next month?
Right.
That's a huge one, the data governance thing.
Absolutely. Right. So it's even that end user governance. And then the other related to that, of course, is workflows, which are slightly different. But I think organizations kind of forget the reality that just like digital transformation before it, and just like virtually anything else marketers have been dealing with, from digital to social to mobile to whatever, it's 80% human. It's only 20% technology at the end of the day. It's 80% human.
Oh, man. Your AI problem is a human problem.
Right. And if you don't think about how
channeling Jennifer Ives on that one, by the way. Sorry, I need to give a credit to somebody.
Yeah. How do my people need to behave differently, and how do I redesign the way they work so that they can work in a hybrid fashion with these tools? Then you end up with scenarios like we're seeing with the media companies right now. Another one this past week, Gannett pulled its AI experiment because people were complaining that their local high school sports coverage sucked because they clearly weren't doing enough editorial oversight.
Right.
They weren't making the articles good. They were just pumping them out of the AI. And they may have had the facts correct, I'm assuming, but they certainly weren't worth reading.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
A brand can't take that. I mean, a media company shouldn't take that kind of risk, but a brand, can't commoditize its entire business because they believe AI can do the work of human writers with little to no oversight. So that comes down to how do you design those workflows, and how do you say, look, here's where AI plays a role, here's where the human plays a role, here's where you work in tandem with the AI as a co-pilot or an assistant. Here's where you make a decision and you live with it, right?
Yeah.
And that's all about workflow design and redesigning jobs and roles, and probably over the course of time, redesigning everything about the way your marketing organization is structured. But you got to start somewhere, and that's with really kind of guidance, guidelines, and workflows.
Yeah, 100%. And I think for a lot of companies, this is kind of, and this segues to 9, a little bit of a nightmare, right? Where, okay, I realize I need that. I'm not a big company, maybe, and I don't have that. And if I am a big company, shame on me. Um, but whatever, I don't have this, and I don't have the talent to do it, right? Like I don't have that domain knowledge and AI to do that, especially in the marketing department. Maybe I have a data science team or somebody in the IT department that's doing shadow projects at night with Python, but building their own apps. But whatever it is, a lot of people don't have the talent. They don't have the training to do it. They don't have the education to build in these processes, and they have to go out and kind of figure it out amongst this big, ugly hype mess that's out there on the internet. And so I think what you really see now is like the talent gap that a lot of these large companies were facing, and they overhired and they laid people off, and now they're overhiring again, as evidenced by Netflix paying $900,000 for market-leading data scientists, which is bananas, right? Like you really have a huge subject matter expertise issue, and now you either have to home grow people and deal with the kind of hiccups and pains and bumps in the road that come with that, or you got to pay out your nose for it. You got it, etc. Or whoever it might be, because as per our earlier conversation, and you see how this all dovetails together, this big hour-long convention session. Like basically, if you don't have that middle market of vendors supporting you, then there's nothing there. And so there's a huge gap right now. And I don't know if we'll ever overcome it, because AI to me is not a hype bubble, right? I know there's a hype cycle with it, and I know that's going to calm down and eventually stabilize a bit. But this is not going away. This is not going anywhere. I mean, this is part of who we are doing business moving forward. And so will we ever be able to catch up to that talent gap? And those that don't train up to meet this need may be the ones that are out. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's, I think, a couple of layers here, too. This entire show is a big onion, I guess, paraphrase Shrek or Donkey or somebody, Smash Mouth, our rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Hey,
Smash
now
Mouth
you're an
guy.
all-star.
Is I feel like that was inappropriate, but nonetheless,
Rest in peace.
There's the problem. There's the problem you pointed to, the $900,000 data scientist, right? Most organizations are not going to be able to compete with the tech darlings for the top AI talent in the market, right? You're not going to compete against Google and OpenAI and Microsoft and Netflix and Spotify even to attract, a top AI data scientist to your law firm or kind of pinwheel manufacturer, right? So you're always going to have that kind of problem where you need to figure out, where do I get the data science talent, so that I can actually build this? How do I, do I outsource? Who do I outsource to? Can do the consultancies even have the best talent for my needs? But at the same time, you also have this sort of counterbalance, which is, unlike traditional predictive AI, generative AI kind of like threw the doors open to everybody. almost anybody can use it. A lot of people can figure out very quickly how to make stuff with it. Whether that stuff is good or not is another story. But there's this democratization that's happened, and a lot of organizations aren't even training the end users in the fundamental technical skill sets those end users need to make the most of the tools that are at their fingertips. So it's actually, talent becomes this sort of multifaceted challenge for organizations, both in terms of the technical talent and like the so-called layperson who doesn't know, it sounds, whether it's, they don't know how to use the tools from a kind of a sort of systematic standpoint, meaning how do I integrate this into my way of working in a way that's real and responsible and productive, but even down to simple things like I don't know how to prompt. That even that kind of training seems to be missing in a lot of organizations.
Well, and on top of it, there's like all these professional organizations now that are offering training, like, the universities, et cetera, on how to use generative AI. And you're seeing it from the top ones now, like Harvard, et cetera. And you have to really wonder, knowing what we know, we're the ones that are consuming this information on a daily basis. Do they actually know what they're talking about? I mean, every time I read a Harvard Business Review article on generative AI, I want to flush my head in a toilet. Like there was one that came out yesterday where the guy argued that the generative AI's problem, not yesterday, it landed in our mailbox last week. I saw it yesterday. Anyway, long story short, the argument was that generative AI's adoption problem is that there's not enough, there's too much transparency, and that everybody would just use it if they didn't know what was behind it. And I'm like, that is like bonkers, right? Like its problem is its lack of transparency right now, and everybody wanted to know where that information's coming from. This isn't Siri, which is providing you a map. This is like information that people are reading and making decisions based off of something that's much more tangible than a basic Google search. And I wanted to cry. And the same thing with the generative AI issue that they came out with in May, where they had like 4 drunk professors playing with ChatGPT and writing about it. I mean, it's like, come on, now you're going to offer me a course on this? I mean, that's a huge problem. And I think that leaves the market even more kind of like saddled with bullshit.
Potentially.
On top of that, one more point on the talent thing is, I mean, this is also why people are offshoring, right? Like there isn't talent here. That's why people are using India and Pakistan and Eastern Europe and Latin America. I mean, there are actually some budding talent pools in Africa now, and also in Australia and New Zealand. I mean, people are like getting this stuff offshore because they cannot find the talent to do the work. That is another massive and different skill set. Like, have you ever ordered stuff from abroad? Like I used to order swag from China on Alibaba. This is hilarious, kind of embarrassing, but I was that marketing guy that would do that because it was 1/3 the cost. But learning how to procure stuff internationally, really challenging. Like I would not hire a development team abroad without going to meet that team. I just think you need to meet them and also be ready to do business there and also have all the legal side of it. That is not a small, medium enterprise natural talent for most companies. Some tech companies, yes. It is a large company game. Like you want to know where Accenture and PwC's workforce is? Guarantee you at least 50% of their technical teams are abroad.
Sure. Yeah, for better or for worse, absolutely.
I think for better. If you're developing in Silicon Valley and that's it.
Well,
I'm sorry, I don't think you have the best tech.
Right. All right, let's move on to the 10th barrier that organizations face, and this is an interesting one. It's sort of lack of tangible case studies, right? That's always, I always have a sort of love-hate relationship with case studies because we've all been in that situation where you go into a brand as an agency person, you walk into a client and you present a groundbreaking idea that's like super creative and innovative, and the clients like love it. Give me 3 examples of companies in my category who've already done the same thing. right? So case studies can be problematic because they basically lead to not even fast follower, a lot of times slow follower behavior, with Me Too marketing, lookalike stuff, and keeps a lot of great ideas from being executed. But at the same time, for all of the hype that we hear and see about how many organizations have fully, I mean, you believe some of it is like, 80% of the Fortune 500 have fully operationalized generative AI in their organizations, but there are no real examples out there. Now, I've been actually working on a presentation that I've got to give in about a week where I wanted to include a bunch of examples, maybe not 1,000, but like, let's say a half dozen examples of different ways brands are using Gen AI, not just all the same thing 6 times over. And I've been finding some examples. What I'm not finding at this point in time are any real case studies that demonstrate the return from the experiments that these brands are doing. And that might be a function of where we are at this point in time.
Yeah.
That it's still very much experimental. It is just like, in the, 2 years ago days of the metaverse and in the NFT days and in the early days of social, it was enough to be able to put out a press release and say we did something cool and innovative, and you didn't have that same sort of burden of demonstrating ROI. That's going to change.
Right. And what's interesting too is like we've seen a bunch of companies come out and say that they're going to do it. Some have. Like I don't think I've seen the Kia thing yet, right?
Right. That's a good example. We talked about that in episode 1. Where is it? Right. So there's a lot of that as well.
Right. Yeah. And we have seen some people launch stuff and we don't know how it's working. And so when you're looking at this from a brass tacks perspective, which is usually SMART goals, right, or some sort of measurement, where you can see some ROI or some sort of productivity increase. Man, it gets to be really hard to really just latch on to these use cases that people throw out. I mean, I saw another reputable organization send out their marketing email today with X use cases on how to use generative AI writers. And it was just use cases, like ideas on how to use them, with some conceptual thought behind it. It was an okay article, but it had no value in the sense of this is what you can see if you do it this way. This is the percentage increase this person saw. This is the amount of time this person saw. I mean, to me, we're at a point now where we need to start seeing that, or it's like, okay, well, that's a nice idea.
Yeah, I think there's another challenge. I was thinking about this because I was looking at some of these examples that I was finding, and some of them are clearly just kind of puff up the PR pumpery, right?
Boy,
you're
we
like,
never
wow,
see
that's
that.
not really right, but like I look at some of these examples, and I think when this is a real challenge is that unlike a lot of the innovations that marketers have kind of embraced over the course of time, AI kind of bleeds into everything else. It's a component of a lot of different things, and I think it's going to be very difficult, other than the time savings or money or cost savings in some cases. I think it's going to be difficult to say specifically whether a given use of generative AI drove the result any more or less than the other things that were involved in a given campaign. Like a good example, and there were no results for it, but like for National Margarita Day, Patron did essentially a user-generated content promotion that used generative AI. You put some prompts into an interface and it created an image that was related to those prompts of like your dream margarita or something. Now you can argue whether that was a good creative idea or a bad creative idea or whatever. It was kind of a fairly run-of-the-mill creative idea as far as I'm concerned. But at the end of the day, if that worked, Did it work because it was a well-designed user generated content program? Did it work because it happened to use generative AI? Did it work because they advertised it in the right place? Did it work because they sent something out in the newsletter with really compelling copy that got their like super fans involved with it? Did it work because they engaged an influencer? Like, we have no idea, right? But there's all of those different pieces, and generative AI was one.
Right. But that
So
speaks to a lack of baseline too, right? Like if you don't have a baseline that you're measuring against, then you're making up
right.
data.
And they may have. I'm not saying they didn't have a baseline, that they weren't measuring effectively. I just don't know. But there were so many pieces in the mix that could have influenced the performance that I don't know how much you can pin it on generative AI specifically. Then the other thing is that these companies may in fact be seeing success with certain things they're doing, but they're not saying. Right? We're at that point still where I think people are like, until everyone catches on and everyone is doing this, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And I'll get the press coverage. I'll let Adweek and Ad Age talk about my campaign, but I'm not going to let my competitor know that I had a 30% lift in performance.
I think
Let my
that's
competitor
probably a
figure it
lot of
out
what
on
we're seeing.
themselves,
Yeah.
right? Let my competitor figure out what to do on their own. And
well, I'll tell you one thing, Greg. I mean, like for example, even within our own space, I've stopped taking calls from agency heads that are asking me like, "What's going on with Gen AI?" It's like, we do enough here with the podcast and with articles, but like it's everybody wants to pick your brain and get free information so they can go do it themselves, and there comes a point where there's how much is there a diminishing return, right? And I think when you're in a competitive marketplace, and I do see marketing agencies eventually trying to offer those professional services we were talking about, it's just like, okay, well, you want me to write your business model for you, right? Or you want me to write your marketing plan to your competitor? Well, I'm competing against you. Or eventually we're going to be competing against each other. Maybe we never will. But either way, it's just stupid for me to give you my business ideas and my DNA. I mean, you don't see Apple going out to help. What's a related technology that's not currently covered by Apple? You don't see them. Well, they're everywhere, aren't they? They just do
they're
everything.
everywhere now. But
you don't see them talking to toaster ovens.
Right. You don't see them talking to
I'm really reaching here.
The dot matrix printer guys are picking their brain.
Right? Like, how does Siri work with my printer? No, I mean, still though, it's just there's a point where what's the difference between providing information for the benefit of everybody and like cutting off your nose to spite your face? Right. And I think a lot of companies, and rightly so, given the state of the market, are not eager to share how they're beating the daylights out of their competitors.
Yeah, especially the ones that are innovating, and for now, they're ahead.
Well, so there's also, just to close on this, and maybe I'll make it my brainer. If you think about it, and you're a company, so we're going to do our brainer and no brainer now. Oh, God.
This all sounded good when we put it on paper. I promise you that, people. It sounded great on paper.
I think this is probably a great show, actually. I think people are probably just like, oh, my God, this is just so thick. This is a thick episode. But, if you are adapting AI, I mean, you really do have an opportunity right now to leapfrog your competitors and like put some major distance between you and them. And I think I've read a few articles where, and I don't know who to source on this, but basically the theory is that those that get ahead now are going to put such a gap between them and their competitors that it's going to be unrecoverable, especially if their competitors resist adoption. And I think from a marketing standpoint, that's true as well. Like, there are those that are going to really just go ahead and just start like spanking the daylights out of their competition. I think one company I've seen really do a good job on that in the auto market, for example, is BMW, clearly using AI, clearly like doing much better than some of their competitors, have started to even rival Tesla a little bit. And that's been really interesting. And at the same time, we know Tesla is using it because that guy's the CEO, but whatever. Anyway, on to you. No brainer.
All right, I guess that means a no-brainer. So I've got to think of something quick. What I'm going to say, because so many of these barriers come down to people, whether it's leadership commitment or resistance among employees or lack of talent or, kind of the effort it takes even to find case studies or your understanding of your customers or, kind of even the governance and workflows of a lot of these things come down to people. And I would say, certainly go back, look at the show notes, check out the website and check out the show notes where we will articulate these 10 points a bit more clearly so you can pick them apart a little bit and see what's what and jump around the episode. But I think, kind of look at these barriers and think about, how do I ensure that the people in my organization are thinking about these things, are addressing these things proactively, and are turning my organization into the kind of organization that Geoff just described, which is an organization that is innovating ahead of its competitors in a way that gives it an insurmountable competitive advantage. That almost sounded articulate. Holy crap.
Your AI problem is a human problem.
Absolutely.
All
right.
I think that's a good place to end it, right? A good job on that. I think it was a good episode. But you should let us know in our comment section. Please do leave a review and hit the like button to show your support wherever you listen or follow us. And thank you for listening to us through the Marketing Podcast Network or however you get your favorite podcasts. Be sure to give that review again. We really need the ratings. They're very helpful. Even share the podcast. We greatly appreciate that. And last but not least, per Greg, you can find notes on nobrainerpodcast.com. And that's also where you can tell us we're great, or you can be honest and tell us we suck too. And with that, peace out. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.